Before we start, as always, we'll recite the Mangala Charanam prayers. You can please also join in behind muted mics. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurum Militam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Vanchakalpa Turubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vashadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Namo Vishnupadaya, Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale, Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamin Niti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Ashtacha Dishatarine. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So today's verse, text number 35. Sukham tu idanim trividham shrinu me bharata shabha abhyasad ramate yatra dukhantam cha nigachyati. Word for word synonyms. Sukham, happiness. Tu, but. Idanim, now. Trividham, of three kinds. Shrinu, yea, me, from me. Bharata Sabha, O best among the Bharatas. Abhyasat, by practice. Ramate, one enjoys. Yatra, where? Dukkha, of distress. Antam, the end. Cha, also. Nigachati, gains. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. O best of the Bharatas, now please hear from me about the three kinds of happiness by which the conditioned soul enjoys, and by which he sometimes comes to the end of all distress. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. A conditioned soul tries to enjoy material happiness again and again. Thus, he chews the chewed. But sometimes, in the course of such enjoyment, he becomes relieved from material entanglement by the association with a great soul. In other words, a conditioned soul is always engaged in some type of sense gratification. But when he understands by good association that it is only a repetition of the same thing, and he is awakened to his real Krishna consciousness, he is sometimes relieved from such repetitive, so-called happiness. So the verse again, O best of the Bharatas, now please hear from me about three kinds of happiness by which the conditioned soul enjoys, and by which he sometimes comes to the end of all distress. So as we've been discussing, this chapter 18 is a summary of the chapters 1 to 17. And in particular, these verses 18 to 40, the Lord is summarizing how the three modes of material nature, they control all activities and all beings. As we've just read in text number 40, the Lord says, even Lord Brahma, the highest living being in the material world, he cannot escape the control of the three modes of material nature. And in quick summary, in text 20 to 22, the Lord has described knowledge in three modes. In text 23 to 25, the Lord has described work in the three modes. In text 26 to 28, the Lord has described the worker, karta, in three modes. In 30 to 32, there's been discussion about intelligence or understanding in three modes. And in our most recent discussions, in text 33 to 35, we've been discussing determination, driti, in three modes. And today we start the section where the Lord is going to describe happiness, sukham, in three modes. Now, when we've been reading the verse, the overall sense that I get reading the section 20 to 40 is how much bound we are by the three modes of material nature, and how we are so much controlled by the three modes of material nature. This is a sense we have to get. So many times in this section of verses, the Lord has said, touch, renew, touch, renew, touch, renew. Now hear carefully from me, Arjuna. Listen carefully, because the Lord wants us to really understand this concept of the three modes of material nature, and how we as jivas, as tiny jivas, how we are so much controlled by these three modes of material nature. And the Lord is explaining from so many different angles of vision of how these modes are affecting us, so that it just gets instilled in our consciousness. If we want happiness, if we want freedom, we've got to come out of the clutches of the three modes of material nature. This is one of the purposes of the Bhagavad Gita, to give us this knowledge, to equip us how we can come. 99.9% of the world did not have any conception of what the three modes of material nature, but yet they are acting under it. So in these verses, we will now, this verse is the preamble to what the Lord will discuss in goodness, passion and ignorance, about sukham, happiness. Once Srila Prabhupada was asked, what is the goal of life? And Srila Prabhupada gave a very simple answer. He said, the goal of life is to enjoy. The goal of life is to be happy. So different classes of people or sections of society, they have different conception of what constitutes happiness. So in these verses, the Lord is going to describe what is deemed to be happiness from the perspective of the three modes of material nature, and what is the perspective of happiness from the Lord's perspective. Because Krishna is desiring. Why settle for something so low, insignificant? You are eligible. We are eligible, to some higher happiness. That's not temporary. That's not relative. That is our right. But yet we are so perturbed, so covered over that we are endeavoring for something less. Sometimes we may see this drunken man, he's lying in the gutter. He's drinking. And he's in a horrible situation. And you go up to him and say, "Sir, tell me, are you happy?" And he will say, "I am very happy. I am very happy." But yet we can see, his situation is horrible. He's horrible, but he's thinking he's happy. So in the same way, our perception of happiness is so distorted. We conceive ourselves to be happy where there is no real happiness. So the Lord, through his words, through his message of the Bhagavad Gita, is trying to enlighten us. Just like we may try to see that drunken man in the gutter. No. This is not happiness, really. No. We may try to help them. So this is what the Lord is trying to do for us. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada gives focus to the last part of this verse. There is this word antam in this verse. Duk antam. Antam. So Krishna is saying that there can be an end to all of this distress. Prabhupada calls it so-called happiness, but Krishna is very direct. He says dukkam. This is all just distress. What we perceive to be happiness, this is just dukkam. But Krishna is saying this can come to an end. And Prabhupada gives some particular focus to this in the purport. And Prabhupada, he likens the situation of the living entity in this material world to chewing the chewed. This comes from a verse spoken by Prahlad Maharaj in the 7th canto, 5th chapter, 30th verse. And there, Prahlad Maharaj uses the word charvitam charvananam. Prabhupada quotes this particular phrase, charvita charvananam, repeatedly in his lectures. It's chewing the chewed. Trying to extract happiness in this material world is like chewing the chewed. On Saturday, I went to Queensbury, and I was I bought for one of my family members. I bought them the sugarcane juice, and I was watching the man how he was making the sugarcane juice. So he had a big, like rod of sugarcane, and he was pushing it through the machine, and his machine was like crushing it, and then he was making the machine go lower and lower, and he was crushing it more and more till all the juice came out. And eventually, when there was no more juice in the sugar cane, he threw that in the bin, and he gave me the cup of sugarcane juice. Our situation is like we're going to the bin, we're taking that sugar cane, which all the juice has been pressed out, and we're chewing. We're chewing, saying, let me try to get some juice. But there's no juice. No more juice there. It's all finished. And the endeavor for happiness in this material world is like that. Chewing the chewed. There's no more juice. It's been chewed. Everything's been extracted. And Prahlad Maharaj says, because of their uncontrolled senses, persons too addicted to materialistic life make progress towards hellish conditions and repeatedly chew that which has already been chewed. Their inclination towards Krishna are never aroused, either by the instruction of others, by their own efforts, or by a combination of both. And Prahlad Maharaj then goes on to say, and I'll just read these few verses because they are so instructive. Persons who are strongly entrapped by the consciousness of enjoying material life, and who have therefore accepted as their leader or guru a similar blind man attached to external sense objects, cannot understand that the goal of life is to return home back to Godhead and engage in the service of Lord Vishnu. As blind men, guided by another blind man, miss the right path and all fall into a ditch. Materially attached men, led by another materially attached man, are bound by the ropes of fruitive labor, which are made of very strong cords, and they continue again and again in materialistic life, suffering the threefold miseries. Dear devotees, this has been our situation for millions of lives. We've been chewing the chewed, and we've been led by blind men, leading us down a blind path and making us fall into a ditch. This has been our situation for many lifetimes. But by some unbelievable good fortune, we have received the purport of this verse. Unless they smear upon their bodies the dust of the lotus feet of a Vaishnava, completely free from material contamination, persons very much inclined towards materialistic life cannot be attached to the lotus feet of the Lord, who is glorified for his uncommon activities. Only by becoming Krishna conscious and taking shelter at the lotus feet of the Lord in this way can one become freed from material contamination. So there's only one way out, and that is to smear the dust of the lotus feet of the great devotees on our head. And what does it mean to smear the dust? It has two meanings. The first meaning is the physical dust, if we are fortunate to get. And the second meaning is to take the instruction of that great Vaishnavas into our heart. And that, Prahlad Maharaj says, is the only way we come out of the situation of chewing the chewed. So the Lord is going to describe in these following 3 verses the different types of happiness. So I won't discuss it from that perspective, because the devotees for the next 3 days, I'm sure they will give us some very nectarian realizations and explanations. But I just want to talk about 3 types of happiness stated. Well, actually there's 4, but the Nectar of Devotion gives particular focus to 3 types of happiness and the distinction between them. So these are the different types of happiness. The first type of happiness is the happiness that comes from sense gratification. That is the external type of happiness. That is the type of happiness that 99.9% of the population is trying after. But this happiness, those who are intelligent, they realize it's just temporary, it's relative, it's limited. So those who are completely frustrated, they've just had enough of trying for external happiness through sense gratification, they go within. So the second class, they will endeavor for happiness that comes from Brahman realization. The realization that comes from, I am not the body, but I am spirit. Aham Brahmasi. And that is far, far, far superior to any type of happiness comes from sense gratification. Then there's the happiness that comes from attaining mystic perfections. There are 8 types of mystic perfections: becoming smaller than the smallest, bigger than the biggest, heavier than the heaviest, traveling to other planets, and so on, walking on water. There is a certain type of happiness. One famous German scholar He said, what's so great about this happiness? The material scientists, they've created rockets and airplanes that can fly through the sky and go to other planets. They've created boats that can float on water. So what is so great about these mystic perfections? The happiness is limited. And then there is the happiness that comes from the execution of pure devotional service. In the Nectar of Devotion, Srila Rupa Goswami does a beautiful comparative study. He said at the stage, there are 3 stages of bhakti. It's a stage of sadhana bhakti, regulative devotional service. There's a stage of bhava bhakti, which is the stage of ecstatic devotional service. And then there's the stage of prema bhakti, which is the stage of pure love of Godhead. And there he said, in the stage of sadhana bhakti, regulative devotional service, the type of devotional service that we are practicing, practitioners, even at this stage, the practitioner of devotional service has a real sense that bhakti is superior to sense gratification and liberation. That is there. A devotee, even a sadhaka, can just realize there's just nothing in sense gratification. And liberation, to merge and become one. Where's the happiness there? It is said at the stage of bhava bhakti, one gets the sense that bhakti is so superior that sense gratification and liberation, they seem so insignificant. So at the previous stage, it is superior. But at the stage of bhava bhakti, it's like, it doesn't even practically feature. And then at the stage of prema bhakti, the happiness of devotional service is so incalculably superior that one cannot even perceive the existence of happiness from sense gratification or liberation. That means it's completely off the radar. It is not even considered happiness. It is just completely off the radar. There's just no interest in sense gratification or any happiness that may come from liberation. And this is what Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita, the 2nd chapter, text number 59. Param drishva nivartate. Though the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, the taste for sense objects remains. But seizing such engagements by experiencing a higher taste is fixed in consciousness. When we come to the stage of param drishva nivartate, then everything else is completely off the radar. Devotional service is just everything in one's life. In one lecture in New York in 1967, Srila Prabhupada, he quoted the great Acharya, Yamuna Acharya, who has written about his life experiences in one verse. And Prabhupada quotes this verse again. Quite often you'd hear this. Yad avadi mam tetaha Krishna padhara vindayo. So long my mind and attention is absorbed in Krishna consciousness, tadhavadi. Since then, tadhavadi bhata nari sangame. Since my mind is being engaged in the transcendental loving service of Krishna, realizing ever new pleasure in him, whenever I think of sense pleasure, I spit at the thought and my lip curls with distaste. Here we see how much so-called sense gratification is completely off the radar for one who's got the genuine taste for devotional service. And in connection with these verses in the Nectar of Devotion, Srila Rupa Goswami quotes some verses from the various scriptures. And the first verse he quotes from the Tantra Shastra, where Lord Shiva is speaking to his wife Sati. And he says, my dear wife, a person who has surrendered himself at the lotus feet of Govinda and who has thus developed pure Krishna consciousness can be very easily awarded all the perfection desired by the impersonalists and beyond. He can enjoy the happiness achieved by the pure devotees. So he's saying that one who surrendered to Krishna, his happiness is just uncalculable. And then in the Ari Bhakti Sudadhai, it is said by Prahlad Maharaj. Prahlad Maharaj is talking to Lord Nrsingadev, and he says, my dear Lord, I repeatedly pray unto your lotus feet that I may simply be stronger in devotional service. Such a nice prayer, we should learn this. My dear Lord, I repeatedly pray unto your lotus feet that I may simply be stronger in devotional service. I simply pray that my Krishna consciousness may be more strong and more steady, because happiness derived out of Krishna consciousness and devotional service is so powerful that with it, one can have all the other perfections of religiousness, economic developments, sense gratification, and even the attainment of liberation from material existence. This is such a beautiful prayer by Prahlad Maharaj. And we can learn this prayer and repeat it. Now in our conditioned state, we consider so many insignificant things to be the source of our happiness. But when we become strong in Krishna consciousness, we won't feel. So our prayer is, let me become stronger and stronger in Krishna consciousness. And then Rupa Goswami ends this particular section discussing happiness by quoting one verse from the Narada Pancharatra, where he says, in the Narada Pancharatra, it is also said that any person who has developed even a small amount of devotional service doesn't care a fig for any kind of happiness derived from religiousness, economic development, sense gratification, or the 5 kinds of liberation. Such a nice statement. This doesn't care a fig for any of these. Any kind of happiness derived from religiousness, economic development, liberation, or sense gratification cannot even dare to enter into the heart of a pure devotee. It is said when a glass is full, you cannot pour anything else into a glass. So a devotee's heart is compared to be like that. It is so full and satisfied and complete by devotional service. There is no scope for any type of happiness from religiousness, economic development, sense gratification, or liberation to enter into the heart of such a devotee. And then he gives a very nice metaphor or analogy. He says, it is stated that as the personal attendants and maidservants of a queen follow the queen in all respects and obeisances, similarly, the joys of religiousness, economic development, sense gratification, and liberation follow the devotional service of the Lord. In other words, a pure devotee does not lack any kind of happiness derived from any source. He does not want anything but service to Krishna. But even if he should have another desire, the Lord fulfills this without devotees asking. So these are some very beautiful verses quoted by Srila Rupa Goswami. And for the next 3 days, we'll be studying the Lord's instruction on the different types of happiness, which we should note. So I'll stop here. I'll take any questions, comments, reflections, corrections that any one of you may have.
Dandavat Pranam Prabhu.
Dandavat Pranam Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Thank you So wonderful to see these verses of Prahlad Maharaj to infuse us with enthusiasm and determination to follow in the footsteps of Prabhupada. Thank you for the wonderful reminders.
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Any other comments, reflections, realizations? Please share.
Prabhuji, I'd like to share some realization.
Sure, Prabhu, please do.
I came from Kenya and I got a picture from Prabhupada. God, he gave me a picture of Ram, Lakshman, Sita. He said, you take, this is you, I'm giving you, and you study this, it's going to be a good. And he told me to buy a Bhagavad Gita. And since then, I bought a Bhagavad Gita in 1972. It came in Nairobi.
You met Srila Prabhupada in Nairobi?
Yes.
And you personally received a photograph from Srila Prabhupada?
Prabhupada, yes.
Wow, that is so amazing, Prabhu. You are so
just look-
fortunate.
Yeah, but listen what I'm saying. I put in my altar and the sun was shining, it became black and white. I'm still praying to Krishna and telling Prabhupada, Prabhupada, I will never get a picture like this, which you have given me now. And one day I was just walking in the library. They were selling some of the books and I found this book of Janmashtami of a very old one. And it was only $2.99, so I bought it. You wouldn't believe me, the photo was there inside there, the colored one, which mine was black and white, has turned into color. The same photo came back again in my altar. It's a
Nice.
color one.
Amazing.
And this is the power of Prabhupada.
Yes, Srila Prabhupada is. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. That's a
I
wonderful.
said,
Thank you.
I said to Prabhupada that I will never get this photo of yours now in color, but I got it. Look, this is how Prabhupada reacts to me as well. So I see always that Prabhupada is given a very good lectures. And you have given him so nice. You have just given me a happiness answer from Prabhupada. So good. I really like it, Prabhuji. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you for sharing that wonderful pastime with Srila Prabhupada. You're most fortunate. Anyone?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna, Mataji.
My humble obeisances to you. Dandavat Pranam. I was just thinking, the happiness you're saying, there are many types of happiness. So one is sense gratification, and the next one jumps into Brahman realization. So I was thinking, because sense gratification is this kind of so lowest happiness, and then it jumps into Brahman realization is quite, you have to be quite knowledgeable to have that Brahman realization. So in between, I was thinking, aham mameti, it is also me and mine. What kind of happiness is that? Like me and mine is my people and my family, my nation, my this, my that. People become happy by that as well. How much, just how do you say it? Like being in the family. So my family is so great, or my nation is so great, or my community is so great. That kind of happiness, where does it fit in?
That always also fits in sense gratification. Prabhupada calls that extended sense gratification when we think my family, my country, and so on, because it's an extension of the body.
Okay, yeah.
It's like if you want to enjoy sense gratification, who do you enjoy? You enjoy with your family members. You enjoy with your countrymen. So Prabhupada classifies that as extended sense gratification through the extensions of the body. We have the body, we enjoy the senses of the body, but the family and the countrymen, there's extensions of the body. That's what Prabhupada calls it, extended sense gratification.
Okay, thank you. Wonderful. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. All right. If there's no further questions or reflections or comments, I thank you for your attendance and your participation. Panchakalpa Turubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bevacha.
Patitana Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo. Thank
Hare
you.
Krishna.
Hare
Thank you,
Krishna.
Prabhuji.
Wonderful.
Thank you,
Prabhupada.